So I look at the league, though, from an outsider's perspective. I'm like, it appears to be on cruise control. Like, why not just put your feet up and ride the coattails? Like, what would be some of those initiatives where you're like, hey, we can improve or innovate in these areas?
So there's absolutely league initiatives, and there's also just some. We've done a lot of counterpunching, and I think that's to be expected in the season. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but whether it's college eligibility questions, there's a lot of things that kind of came into our life that maybe we. I don't want to say we weren't ready, but we had to maybe attack or address quicker than we perhaps first thought. So there's some of that. So you have your own menu that you want to get to. That's what the off season's for. That's strategic planning. That's when you're outlining your KPIs and all the things you want to get to. And then better than anybody, Aaron, once the season starts, I'm counterpunching, right? Because there's trades, there's rules and regulations, there's player procurement issues, there's a player safety issue and suspensions. And so once the season started, we kind of had to sink our teeth into season mode. And one of our biggest accomplishments was just keeping the trains running on time. I don't mean to set the bar that low, but here you have this new commissioner, you have this new VP of hockey operations, and for us it was really quite something just to keep the trains running on time and making sure that we were unpacking all the critical game ops and league ops stuff that we had to do. And we did that, which is great. So some of the things that we want to get to, and me, like there's some pretty major player development initiatives that we want to get to.
Yeah.
And on the ice, off the ice, holistic development type issues. I think that's always at the forefront. We're also at a period of, I guess you would just say, there's a lot of critical league decisions coming down the pike all at once. And whether that's growing your league, how you want to do that, being strategic and intelligent about that, whether that's controlling the controllables, yes, right. But then there's also the NCAA is in, I don't want to say in turmoil, but safe to say that it's a rapidly changing environment, right? So like there's been unpacking that.
Indeed. Yeah.
There's a lot, man. Like there's been a lot.
Well, I mean, you talk about the trains running on time. So last week I was in Vegas and we work with the Junior Knights youth program. I had a chance to go to my first Golden Knights game. That's bucket list, awesome. But then the next day I go to, so their corporate offices are at their practice facility out in Summerlin. And so it occurred to me, like, we take for granted that the puck drops at 7:05 and that the anthem started this time and the helmet comes down, that the players skate through at this specific time. And so, you enjoy that. But then the next day you go in and, I got to meet a bunch of the staff and you see the person that's in charge of like the game production. And in his office, he's got, just like the same way a coach to have like whiteboards with forechecks and all that drawn up. He's got like the Golden Knight's going to come out here and this light's going to go here. And, the director of marketing has to make sure we need the person to like sound the alarm to get the crowd pumped up. And then there's the music person. And you're like, holy cow, like this is like a Super Bowl 42 times a year. And you realize there's so much, like it just takes one little thing to go wrong. That particular game, the Axis app, their ticketing app, goes down before the game. And they were letting in Toronto Maple Leafs fans who had bought secondary tickets, taking their word that, they had a screenshot that said they had a ticket. So I look at you, it's a Friday night, every team in the USHL is playing. A bus could break down, a Zamboni could break down, any number of things could happen. Take us through, like, what are you doing on a Friday night? Like, are you just, do you get outside of 5 feet of your phone to?
Yeah, no, you're on it, and your instinct is right. So I was fortunate to spend a lot of time in that 3-letter league, and
Yeah.
you take those things for granted. You don't think about those things, and especially when you're on the team side, the area in which you're operating, you have such a small remit. There's such a high level of specialization at that point. And these are billion-dollar entities,
Yeah.
and they can hire 12 people to do 12 jobs. Sometimes they hire 12 people to do 10 jobs, right? Like there's just, you're so overstaffed and you're working in such a specialized area that when I went to the Olympic space briefly, and now when I came here, you wear a lot of hats, and I think you take for granted that what I experienced in the NHL. To your point, it's like we deal with so much at any one time. So on a Friday, yeah, this is the war room, right? Like there's 16 teams, there's 8 games going, and your phone could be pinging from any one of those 8, and it could be an on ice issue, it could be an off ice issue, there could be weather. We're changing a game. The ZAM went down. There's just so many things that you deal with here. Um, it's a challenge, but having now seen this side, like you're so in the fray and you're so in the mix that there's something to be said for that too.
Yeah.
There's always something going on. You're spinning so many plates, whether it's a game ops issue, it's a roster issue, it's an e-bug. There's something happening in any one of these buildings, and even the wife laughs because you're Friday, you're home, you're on that, the phone's close, no matter what you're doing,
Totally. Yeah,
right?
I bet.
Because it could hit the fan at any moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dive in more to the league, but when I was sort of doing some research into your background, I had this like epiphany all of a sudden. I'm like, oh my God, like Ian grew up in Chicago during the Bulls dynasty. Like,
Yeah,
given the profession that you're in, how much does it change if the Bulls don't win 6 championships? Kind of right, and what I would imagine is probably the point where you're kind of like diving headfirst into your sports fandom.
you're on it. You that was very linear of you to figure that out. So I'm a fourth generation Chicagoan, like born and bred. We're dug. If you put the pin on the map, my entire extended family is within 5 minutes. Like that, we're Chicago through and through, right? In the baseball sense, it's a north side, south side
Yeah.
thing. You're a
Where do you
Sox
land on
fan.
that? Sox?
So I'm on the north side, born and bred. I was raised a block off of Addison, and I'm a fourth generation Sox fan. So that made me like very rare up in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Um, Blessed. Yeah, maybe you don't realize it at the time what that means to grow up in a sports town like Chicago. I certainly understand it now. You take it for granted, but I was a child of the sporting '90s, and you went home and you watched Michael. That's what you did. That was your night. Like when you came home from school, it's dad and the couch and the Bulls are on, and there's a 90% chance they're going to win, right?
Yeah.
And that was my youth, right? I was very, very fortunate. The Bulls win. We're out in the car, in the parade. The streets are flooded. Like I was able to live that. It made a big dent on me. It's probably not coincidental that I ended up making my livelihood in sports. You have the Bears, the heritage franchise of the NFL, and of course you have the Blackhawks, an original 6 franchise. And years later, you fast forward that, and very fortunate to be a part of what you might argue is another dynasty, right? So very fortunate as far as that goes. But the Michael Jordan Bulls, you can't. I don't know if today's young sports fans understand. I mean, you lived it too, Aaron. Like they were beyond sport celebrity status. Like they were rock stars. Like when you went to Europe, it was Chicago, Michael Jordan. Like that was the
I
thing.
was just gonna say, like in the Last Dance doc, like the scene that stands out to me, and I think it's in episode 1. It's almost like the opening of the documentary is when they're in Paris when they go to play a game over there. And as you say, it's like the Beatles or Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson.
They were the
Yeah,
Beatles.
it's exactly it.
In Chicago, we had the unfortunate association probably with Al Capone, right? And
Yeah.
you would travel and they would say, rat-a-tat-tat and gangsters in Chicago. But then once the 90s came around, it was Michael Jordan. Like no matter where you went on the planet, it was Bulls, it was sports. It still gives that Netflix documentary was awesome. The 90s Bulls intro, I'll
Yes.
pull that up on YouTube every few
Totally.
months,
Yeah.
just for no reason, just
Yeah.
at my desk, just to pull it up. Yeah.
So, with young people growing up in your generation, I mean, I don't know what the math would be, but needless to say, like you and every other kid, the first goal is to play a sport professionally, and then when that door closes, It's probably to work in sports. And then it's like, man, like the cherry on top would be to work in sports in your hometown. I would have, without doing the calculations, it's probably like a 1% of the 1% to get the opportunity to work for one of your hometown teams. Take us through how that opportunity or that door opened.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. Blessed beyond belief as far as that goes. Um, Probably not unlike many sports fans at that time or aspiring sport professionals. I read a book called Moneyball, and that's when I realized um, there's an angle here. There's a way to be a sports professional that does not have to be a former athlete. Um, what can that look like? And that book did it for me. So I thought it was going to be law, and that was the plan. So I went to the University of Illinois. I was very fortunate to intern for the Blackhawks the summer of my junior year. Now,
In what role?
yeah, so it was a hockey operations internship, and that was the dark days of the Blackhawks. That's when you were the laughing stock, not just of hockey, but of sports. Home games aren't
Yeah, the
televised.
blackouts. Yeah.
The, the building is empty. Very fortunate to catch on as an off-season, unpaid intern. Okay, so that was the summer of my junior year in hockey
What
operations.
year?
There I
What
was
year is that?
exposed.
Like
Yeah,
2006.
so the summer of '07.
Okay.
Stan Bowman is the director of hockey operations. Dale Talon's the general manager. Bob Pulford, who was Mr. Pulford to me, ran hockey operations
And he was the
and
son, correct?
contract.
He was the Bob is the son of
Mr. Pulford is senior, and then he had a son who was a longtime scout who you've probably run
yeah,
into along the way.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, Contracts were sent in by fax. I caught the tail end of old sports, which was very cool to see.
I
And that
bet.
summer, it was filing contracts, it was understanding immigration. Like I got a very cool up close and personal look behind the scenes. Go back to school for my senior year, and the plan was law school. And the plan was always law school. And the thought was, I need a differentiator if I'm going to work, if I'm going to make it in
But it
sports. And
was
there's a
always
lot of lawyers.
sports. Like the goal was still sport.
Yeah, and and the thought was, if it doesn't happen, you have a union card. You're a lawyer
Yeah.
still, and I can fall back on, and maybe I fall in love with litigation or I fall in love with real estate law. But the thought was, let's go to law school in the hopes of getting back to sports. Right, that was always the plan. So I graduate, I take the LSAT. I wanted to take a year off before going to school. Okay, so I reach out back out to the Blackhawks. Stan Bowman's the AGM now. Stan, I'm headed to school. That's part of my plan. But I was this off-season intern. I'd love to see what happens in season. Ian, we'd love to have you. There's actually been a lot of exciting changes. Why don't you come back down? Great. So now I'm an intern for the second time. It was paid that time, barely. Um, and on the very day I wrote my check to law school, I was offered a full-time job. And that was like that iconic moment and that fork in the road moment. And people laugh and they say, well, how quick did you tear up the check? And it's like, actually, it was a gut-wrenching decision on the one hand, because I've worked my whole life for this. I got into the law school I wanted to go to. It's right there. But I just got a chance to work in the NHL in my hometown. We just drafted this kid named Patrick Kane. You got the sense that this thing's about to be a rocket ship. It's like law school will always be there to take my money. I can't pass this up. To your point, when do you start in the NHL in your hometown? And the rest is history. Very had a charmed run, right? Like unbelievable.
So I could see how a lot of people, pardon me, would look at that, and I would say like it's a dynasty in today's sports landscape with the salary cap, etc. But I mean, we see it today. We see lots of teams in the NHL that have had a great run of early draft picks, and they can't even get themselves into the playoffs, let alone to a Stanley Cup final. In hindsight, what did you see was going besides drafting Patrick Kane? Was there anything else that signaled to you that said, hey, like, whether it's the right people are on the bus or the right, structure or organizational philosophy is in place for
Yeah.
this thing to take off.
Once again, you're on it, and it doesn't surprise me given how dialed in you are and how long you've been doing this. But on the ice, if you'll remember, thinking back now, it feels like a long time ago, but Bickle, Bufflin, Bolin, Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, that group was already 2 years ahead in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So you had the makings of this unbelievable foundation. Now you're dropping in Taves and Kane. You had this young core, this on ice product that was several years, and arguably as a Chicagoan, like decades of heartbreak in the making. But the on ice product felt really, really close.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you talked about the off ice piece. That absolutely factors in. They hired a new president at that time. Rocky Wirtz came in
Yeah.
for Mr. Wirtz. So now you had a new owner, you had a new president. They were going to modernize that franchise. Okay, you could tell that we're serious. What we're going to win here. We're back on television. Like, it's time to drag this organization into the 21st century. If I was given that same offer to work for those old Hawks, I don't know, honestly, and people laugh, but I don't know if I would have made that decision because, again, it was such a backwards organization, with all due respect,
Yeah.
but they were so behind the times. So I saw this marriage of really intelligent people in the front office, really talented people on the ice, and here I have a chance to come in and be a part of this at the ground floor. No one could have predicted where we would have ended up, but you had the sense that this thing is about to be a rocket ship, and if I pass this up, I could be passing up something pretty special here.
Well, you wouldn't have the LinkedIn profile pic you have today, and that would be a real bummer.
Yeah, but it's right.
Yeah.
Like, again, you said 1% of the 1%. It must be. It has to be.
No,
Like, how many people go their entire careers and never even get back to their hometown, let alone you start in your hometown, you're blessed enough to be a part of a dynasty. It is the 1% of the 1%.
no, absolutely. But it was such a, I'll compare it, maybe a little bit ahead, but I know here in Vancouver, for example, where, Mike Gillis brought in a sleep doctor, and that was like front page of the news. And people were like, why is he worried about sleep? And they brought in, like, people who specialized in sports science, and it was very new. And I sensed that you kind of came in and just built on top of it. And a lot of things that today are probably commonplace for most franchises. But, at first, because, man, I mean, you talk about some of the old guard, I can see where someone like you could be viewed as, man, we've got a lottery ticket on our hands and somebody that can really move us forward. I could just as easily see how some people in that old guard would say, man, this kid's an absolute pain in the ass. He's got way too many ideas. Like, let's park him somewhere else in the organization. What did you see as like some obvious ways that you could innovate or enhance the
Yeah,
program?
100%. And again, I was looking back now, fortunate to see the end of old caveman hockey and the advent of sophistication, multi-billion dollar hockey. I got a glimpse of both. Um, Speak when you're spoken to. When you first get here, there were still a lot of those old time scouts that you had to pay respect, and those guys lived it and rode the bus for a long time. Um, you listen, you learn, you try to be a teammate, you contribute where you can. I'd like to think that I acquainted myself well there, but my first role was scouting coordinator, and you couldn't handpick a better entry level position. You're helping pro scouting, amateur scouting. You're leading in preparation for all meetings. You're reading, and this is not an exaggeration, every scouting report filed in the organization, which tallies in the thousands, okay, tens of thousands. It's like I was AI before AI. Like, you learn how hockey scouts scout the game at the moment. You can't. It's invaluable, right? Being able to read that. Um, And we sort of modernized our scouting operations, and very fortunate to be a small part of that, right? So fast forward a few years, we've won a cup. Credit to Stan Bowman and that group. They start to ask, well, where do we gain the next edge, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're fortunate to be a big budget club. We're having some success. So where do we gain the next competitive edge? And we identified pretty quickly player development. And in those days, you had a player development guy, like a guy, and he was in charge of as many as 30 or 40 players around planet Earth. How much developing is happening, right? And the answer is none. And it's not his fault, but if I see Aaron in Vancouver, then I go to the Ontario, then I'm back in the States, then I go over to Europe. By the time I get back to Aaron, right? Like, I can't even see the players enough to make a difference, let alone improve their game, right?
Well, I was going to ask that because I've got friends that have been in that role, you know, and I'll ask them like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Oh, like I go watch this player play, and then I have breakfast with them, and then I go to the next town, I have breakfast with them." Like, so are we developing players through like grand slams at Denny's in like Sudbury, Ontario? Like, how
Right.
is that
But
influencing anything?
we laugh, but that's pretty well
Yeah,
what it was. So we said that there's something better here.
yeah.
Like, there's a better mousetrap. So, Ian, because of that work you did helping in scouting and helping modernize those efforts, do you want to be a part of this player development thing and essentially build, at that time was the league's first like multidisciplinary player development effort? It's like, yes, of course, right? So very quickly we identified four verticals that we wanted to build out. Okay. So you had your skating and skills coach. That was that guy, but he was already spread so thin that we need to beef that up. Okay. So you're on ice skating and skills, defense focused, forward focused. We need to do a better job there. Okay, fine. That's an easy one. We know that. But then it was strength and conditioning, nutrition, and mental performance. Okay. So now we have four verticals that we're going to invest in, build out, and develop holistic development programs that are tailored for each athlete. That wasn't happening. So we were decades behind the others, maybe a decade behind the other sports. This was happening in other sports, okay? But hockey was that far behind where we had a player development guy. You had to get better than that.
Did you have any count? I mean, you talk about Chicago being a sports city. Like, did you have any counterparts with? I'm trying to think when Theo Epstein was hired by the Cubs, but that you could reach out to with the Bears, the Cubs, White Sox, etc., and say, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Can we, get a couple hacks to speed this up?"
And we did
Yeah,
that. And you talk to other sports, and you talk to friends and colleagues around. What we discovered early on, though, is when you talk about the budgets of what the NFL can do, what Major League Baseball can do
yeah.
compared to what the NHL can do, especially this brand new initiative that's never been done before. It was a crawl, walk, run, like in every sense of the term. Um, for instance, strength and conditioning. We had what I thought was a very forward thinking idea, but let's get a strength coach whose sole focus is these players who are not yet in our program, right? We're very proud of the work we do once you're in our building. Once you get to Rockford, once you get to Chicago, we're very proud of the work we do there. We can get you bigger, faster, stronger. We can work with things on the ice. How do we take advantage of that? Could be up to 4-year runway before you're even in our building. That was it. That was the key. Like, how do we take advantage of that? And we would sit in draft rooms, and every year we would hear the same things about prospects. He's got to get bigger and faster. This kid's got to get faster and stronger. The kid's okay, but what are we doing about that? It's one thing to say that, but what are we doing about that? Or what does that mean?
Yeah.
So let's have a strength coach who can drill into each player, go out and make these site visits, work with their programs, and try to be as precise as we can, because what Aaron needs is different than what Ian needs, which is different than what Joey needs, right? So those were very early days. We had the feeling we were onto something. And I think if you fast forward it to today, that's probably close to an industry standard, right? But it was fun. It was fun to be a part of those early days.
What did it look like? Pardon me, from a a skill development standpoint, and I look at baseball, and probably one of the books I gift the most is The Cardinal Way, and it talks about the St. Louis Cardinals and how way back in the 60s they realized we should get a pitching coach, we should get a batting coach, and when we bring players on, it's probably as important as it is to recognize what they can do. We should have, be equally clear on what they can or what the areas they need to improve on, and give them the resources to improve that and track it so players know that this is what a major league level and this skill looks like. And again, as obvious as that sounds, I mean, every sport has had to go through an evolution to have that mindset. So how did you look at if a player was, you needed to improve their shot or their passing? How
Yeah.
would you deal with that?
Well, if you look back at the timeline, that was also the the advent, or at the very least the proliferation of video scouting. Like those were early days. We had to beg, borrow, and steal for video. I had illegal passwords I shouldn't have had for European leagues. I had to trade with people for video. Like those were the Wild West days for getting video. So again, we learned, let's start sharing clips with our athletes of what they can emulate, players they can emulate. We have several on the Blackhawks, right? But there's also players on other teams that we think that you can emulate this player. Let's start sharing clips. Let's start talking about those clips together with you. Let's send unique clips to Aaron that we're not going to send to Ian because they're different players. So those were the very earliest days of that too. So you're Aaron and you're in Vancouver. Hey, I'm your defense development coach. I'm going to send you 8 clips. Let's meet Tuesday afternoon. Let's talk about those. Let's talk about your game. Let's put some of your clips up against those clips. Those were like the very earliest days of that. Again, it's probably an afterthought now, and with all the hockey scouting products we have nowadays. But again, those were early days. Like we were learning how best to do that. Not every athlete had a tablet or an iPad. Not every athlete had. So
Yeah.
just like quite literally understanding how to share video, how to talk through video with players, and then understanding very early on, it's not a one size fits all approach. What Ian needs is very different than what Aaron needs. Ian may have been eating like a monk since he was 12. He knows his body. He knows how to eat. You go to the other player, he's still eating McDonald's, that never even understood nutrition. Okay, well, that's one player that maybe we're going to zone in on nutrition more with Aaron than we. And round and round we go. We saw every different variation of that. Some kids have been training, they're chiseled, they have their grown physiques and bodies since they were 12. Another guy hasn't stepped foot in the gym.
Yeah.
Or worse, he's training with a football knucklehead strength coach in the offseason that has him training completely deleterious to how he should be training. So when you develop this player development department for the first time, you're able to spend those resources and develop individualized plans for athletes. Again, we laugh. It's like an afterthought nowadays, but those were like, that was the start of it.
Another innovation that I credit to Chicago during that era, again, that's become commonplace, and I don't know if it directly links back to the Blackhawks. It's just my recollection is I can remember when you stopped practicing in the second half of the season, or Joel Quenneville would start taking a lot of days off and emphasize rest. And I can remember at the time, like that was like they got a lot of weird looks for the rationale behind that. Were you a part of that decision? And I'm just curious. Again, the science behind it makes sense now, but what I'd be most curious about is like, how does the decision, or how do you gain alignment in an organization that, hey, this is how we're going to approach that? Because I don't sense that would just be Joel's decision or your decision or Stan Bowman's decision. That's probably people in a room saying, hey,
Well,
we're going to go.
and credit a guy like Joel Quenneville, who's as old school, who has as many pelts on the wall as anybody,
Yeah.
for embracing that. Here's a future Hall of Fame coach who's willing, who's thinking, progressively thinking. So we were fortunate to have a lot of progressive thinkers, a lot of first principle, outside the box type thinkers, but it takes organizational buy-in for that to work. You have to have a guy like Joe Quenneville who's going to say, hey, I might be the all-time win leader, but I'm willing to try something new. Like that's not nothing. Like that takes a very special coach to be willing to do that. The sports science does back it up. So let's anchor all of our arguments empirically whenever possible. Let's show the data. Let's show why this is a good idea. In my lane in player development, we did something very similar where flash back to those old Hawks days, that old school Neanderthal hockey that I caught the tail end of. Player development camp was anywhere from 70 to 100 players coming to town for a week.
Wow.
Scrimmaging in the summer, and off you go.
Yeah.
We haven't developed you. We didn't teach you anything. It was a meat market. You came in, you scrimmaged, our draft picks interspersed with all these free agents, and out you go. We had this thought, let's actually develop you for a week. We're interrupting your off-season training, which is already not the most intelligent thing to do. So let's bring you into town and let's make the on-ice component secondary.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we bring you into town, let's teach you how to train. Let's teach you how to eat. Let's give you mental resilience skills and workshop and do things from like a human performance perspective. Let's teach you what it might look like to be a pro. And then we'll spend that second half of the day on the ice. Okay, but when we get on the ice, it's skills, it's positional, it's instruction. So what went from 3 scrimmages a day, every day, turned into 1 scrimmage at the end of the week.
Wow.
And those kids took that like game 7 of the cup finals. They were breathing fire. They couldn't wait to get there. And it ended up being awesome because we spent this entire week sort of on instruction and actually developing and empowering you. And by the time we had the scrimmage, it was like hair on fire, all out. It was terrific, right? So I think that kind of speaks to your point. Let's anchor as much as we can empirically, but just credit the organization at that time and Stan Bowman. They were very willing to think outside the box, and that's how some of that stuff happens.
Was there any people, sports organizations that you took a lot from, or even today that you might say, hey, like this is where I would go to find out what's next?
It's a great question. Hockey was so far behind the times in that era that it was easy. It was like, let's see what they're doing in baseball. Let's see what they're doing in football. Let's understand that now we haven't even talked about analytics. Hockey's analytical revolution is probably just happening now, right? Or it has started. The hockey analytical revolution was 10, 15 years behind baseball, right? And I don't think our sport lends itself to the analytical obsession that baseball does, right? Baseball, individual sport, or, individual batter, individual pitcher, individual outcome. From there, you can derive almost an endless amount of metrics, right? Our sport, it's a flow sport. It's a team sport. I don't think we'll ever have that complete analytical overthrow, but it's not nothing either. And in those days, it was also, let's start to understand what hockey analytics might look like. Let's anchor whatever we can empirically as we can. So you didn't have to look far. Like, let's look at baseball. Let's look at football. Let's understand what these other sports are doing, strength and conditioning wise, yes, but also analytics. And now hockey's having its day with analytics. But that was the earliest days of that too.
I just want to go back to your comment about how you broke in the scouting department. So, for example, Sean McVay, head coach of the Los Angeles Rams, and he's kind of considered a offensive guru. And I know when he's been interviewed, they say like, where did you learn to do this? You didn't play at a high level. He's like, listen, he's like, I worked on Mike Shanahan's staff with the Washington Redskins, and I had to draw out every single play. I had to trace it by hand. He's like, I'll tell you what, you do that enough times and you start to gain an understanding for offensive football and how the game is played. And maybe this question is just more for people that might be listening that, like you at one time are like, how do I break into this? To have that foresight to say, hey, like the opportunity to read every single scouting report, that's worth than any amount of money they could pay me at this stage in my career. What advice would you give to your younger self or somebody else that's looking to break in?
Yeah, that was it. You couldn't put a value on it. I'm reading thousands of game reports a year, amateur and pro. And I'm reading that same report about Aaron in October that I'm reading in March. And I'm reading it from multiple scouts. And I'm triangulating what multiple scouts are saying about the same player. Okay. Now I'm doing that for amateur hockey. I'm also getting every single pro report, understanding what makes a good pro. Then you do that for a couple years. I'm able to follow player A from an amateur to he becomes a pro. Why are some guys succeeding as pros but others aren't? And again, like I make that joke about AI. Like I was, as we train AI on bodies of work, like I was training my hockey brain on thousands of scouting reports. And I think today's young aspiring scout, young aspiring hockey professional, go ahead and pair that with video too. That's the one advantage I didn't have. Because again, hockey video was so wild in those days. If I could then see enough about Aaron's game, trying to understand it, go to the video and see if it passes your own eye test. Or try to pair what you're seeing in these game reports to what you're seeing on film. It's so much easier now. Like that's the one thing I didn't have. So read, understand what scouts value, understand what they're looking for in players, understand what coaches are looking for in players, see if it passes your own eye test, match it with video, and then rinse and repeat like 10,000 times. Like that, like that's
Yeah.
literally how you do it.
Yeah. You so at kind of the tail end of your tenure in Chicago, you go back to school. You go take your master's in sports
Yeah.
science at West Virginia. And I've got a couple of questions on this, but the first one is, at that point you got a couple Stanley Cup rings. You're very established. You've kind of led a program that didn't previously exist at any other organization in the league. What were you hoping to get out of that education that you didn't already have?
Yeah, great question. If you'll remember back to the law school aspiration thing, I'm fortunate to be academically inclined. Like I don't mind
Yeah,
school. I'm comfortable in that environment. I like challenging myself. I like learning and growing. So here we are. We're 10 years in, I think, at that point. My wife was pregnant. We don't have kids at home yet. Like I had this little window. It felt like a now or never. If I'm going to do it, this feels like a pretty good time to do it. I understand the ins and outs and the cyclical nature of this program and what we're doing. And I found a program that was very digestible and very doable. Um, and frankly, it was just that self-improvement mindset. Like I might be 10 years in. Let's get back in and understand what they're talking about at the bleeding edge. Let's pick up some business ops chops, which I've never had. I've spent my entire career on the hockey ops side. I'd really like to understand some of the business principles that underline that side of the industry. Let's just get better. Law degree, no, you're not going to shoehorn that in. Like that's too hard. I knew there wasn't the bandwidth, there wasn't the time to get that in.
yeah.
But I found a program that I thought was pretty doable. And it was just that growth mindset that let's go back and learn. And I feel like I had a window to fit it in. And really, really happy I did. I one of the better decisions I would have made.
No, I bet. And what was it? Why did you land on um, West Virginia? And part of the reason I ask, I know Ken Martell, who is the director of player development for USA Hockey.
Yeah.
He is, and I'm man, I'm gonna get this wrong because I know you still teach a course. He still teaches a course back there. What's going on in West Virginia? It just seems like they're maybe in that particular field, they're pretty advanced.
Yeah, so where they're really innovative is sports psychology. So there's only a few programs in the country who are leaders, tip of the spear sports psychology, which is not what I did, by the way, but
Yeah,
they're very proficient in that. And when we ended up starting the performance psychology department many years later, two hires were from West Virginia, and that's not by accident.
Wow.
It's because they're very skilled and trained in this. The online program for me was very digestible in that I was able to focus on one topic at one time. It fit my life. The classes were asynchronous. I'm working 14-hour days, right? There's game days, there's off seasons, there's in seasons. I never know when I'm going to have a few minutes in front of the computer. So that was very appealing. They're doing it right. And I did my research because I said, if I'm going to do this, we're probably going to have to make sure we pick the right program. Had a wonderful experience at West Virginia. And again, talk about blessings and being fortunate. They asked me to come back as an adjunct. So now I'm 2 years as an adjunct instructor there. And now you're giving back. And that's a whole nother level of rewarding. And
I bet.
It's been great. It's just been a great fit with them, and very proud of that program. Couldn't recommend it more. When we talk about differentiators, you want to work in sports, great. Why does sports want you? Right? Like, understand there's a supply and demand issue. Everybody wants to work in sports. But why does sports want you? And what is it about you that's going to stand out amongst the rest? Originally, I thought that was going to be a law degree, and just by pure luck and happenstance, and turns out I didn't need that. But that law degree was going to be my differentiator. So similarly, I think if young aspiring sports pros are thinking about how do I get an edge, think about a grad degree. Could be a law degree, could be a business degree, it could be a sports management or sports science degree. Again, it's just, how are you going to stand out?
Totally. If you had the opportunity now, if somebody gave you like a Brinks truck full of money and said, Ian,
It'd be nice if you know someone. It'd be nice.
yeah. Well, don't worry, I'm first in line, unfortunately. But if they said, hey, like, here you go, money's not a constraint, and you can go build a player development program similar to what you did in Chicago. You don't have to take us through the whole thing, but what might be one of the things that you would do initially that you think, like, I know that there would be a lot of value obtained by investing in this area? What would it be?
So the requisite parts stay the same. We got that right, which is great. And that's agnostic of sport. So whether you're developing a football player, a hockey player, a fencer, it doesn't matter. It seems to me your on ice, your sports specific skills is absolutely, of course, mission critical. That's a major component. Strength and conditioning, nutrition, and mental performance, those seem to be the four requisite parts, right? Again, irrespective of sport. So having those identified is key. I think what would bootstrap a program today is, and again, I don't think we really had these at the time, these things called athlete management system, or AMS.
Yeah.
And it's those systems that bring all of those pieces together into a cohesive whole, so that I have a one-stop shop, easy breakdown of Aaron, the player, what he's doing on the ice, what he's doing off the ice, and then what can I do with data visualization. So some of these AMSs are so slick with actually their data visualization. And we didn't really have that. We had our strength guy, we had our nutritionist, we had sports psychology, and they all talked, and we brought it all together. But if you can really leverage those AMSs nowadays, that's like rocket fuel.
Sure.
to what I would have loved to have had that.
And in my understanding of a lot of these platforms, that effectively they're an aggregate where you might have like a Fitbit and you might be collecting data or have inputs from multiple sources. A lot of these systems just aggregate it, where you can sort of customize the lens that you want to see an athlete's performance through. Is that?
Well, that's it. And then there's data, but there's also usable data. Like, I can get a lot of noise and a lot of data.
Sure.
But do I have the right professionals who are putting that together in a meaningful package? If I'm Stan Bowman, if I'm a general manager, I might have 30 seconds to get in there and look. I don't have a half hour to decipher all this different. I need a snapshot. It needs to be digestible. I need to know where this is going, where it's been, where it's going. So that's where you sort of earn your keep is, and these AMSs are getting very good at it. Give me a snapshot of Ian today, of Aaron today, on a quick glance, understand what they're doing. Can I see periodized training? Can I understand their nutrition plan in one click? That's that's where it's going, and it's getting very sophisticated. And I'm still excited because I think hockey still has major room for growth there too.
You touch on the sport psychology program at West Virginia, and I think we're learning. This is my interpretation that you know the line between mental health and sports psychology appears to be getting less blurry. In that, I think we're understanding that, gosh, if people just feel good about themselves day to day, it seems to translate into them performing better and their sport or whatever vocation they're in. And that certainly there's you can influence that even to a greater degree through sports psychology, but that's kind of the basis. I mean, you're in an organization now that has, I don't know how many hundreds of young athletes, aspiring young athletes, and they've got to go out and perform on the ice, but that's just a small part of their day to day. In between that, they're away from home, they're living with billet families. They've got a whole host of things. I mean, we talk about the operations of the league and the amount of things that could derail that. I would say with the athletes, there's a whole bunch of influences that determine if they're just feeling good about themselves day to day. How do you pull on your past experience and in the role that you're now to ensure that athletes are in a good spot?
Yeah, I'm partial to that performance psychology, if for no other reason that I feel like it captures the essence of I care about you, Aaron, the athlete, and what you're doing on the ice. But if your off ice is a mess, if you don't have mental wellness, you're a person too. You're not just a widget that's playing a sport. They're so interconnected that the off ice, the human being, the human element, the mental wellness underlies anything we're going to do on the ice, and from a performance perspective. So you need to, I don't want to say, I don't know if treat, I'm not a clinician is the word, but you need to address both, right? Like the holistic mental picture. When you think about the USHL, we're talking about 16 to 20-year-olds. I think back to myself at 16. Life was hard enough like at 16 and 20, let, let alone trying to navigate the USHL, my college commitment, a potential NHL draft choice. I have a sick parent or I'm away from home. I broke up with a, those are real human things that happen. So credit Glenn Heffron, and this is a passion project and passion area of mine too, is you talked about the things we want to deliver on in our league. This is one. Like, let's continue to optimize mental wellness and mental resources, because in truth, so many of these athletes today have been training like maniacs since they're 10, 11, 12 years old. They've had skills coaches. They've had mental wellness seems to be the newest frontier, or maybe the one tool that is missing in their toolbox, right? So that's absolutely something we're going to prioritize here. And we've been talking a lot about it.
If you came to me, let's imagine the USHL didn't exist, and somebody came to me with everything I know about hockey and said, Aaron, we want you to establish the best junior hockey development league in the United States, and you can start it anywhere you want. I would not start it in Iowa, Nebraska, like Wisconsin. Like, I think that I mean, we'll dive into some of the statistics and that back up the success of the USHL, but just given the fact that it's not in Michigan, Massachusetts, Minnesota, wherever, what would you point to as the secret sauce that has allowed the USHL to thrive in what I would argue is the level of hockey where there is the most competition for players? When you can consider the amount of junior A leagues in Canada,
Agreed.
the
Agreed.
footprint of, say, the North American League. And that's not saying, I mean, all these leagues are doing a great job. But you guys, by the numbers, I mean, it speaks for itself. what's been the secret sauce for the USHL to thrive?
So again, this is an area I cannot, will not take a lot of credit, right? Having been here less than a year, we inherited a terrific on ice product. And that's a credit to all the hockey men and all the hockey women who have been here a long time, getting the USHL to where it is today, which is probably the strongest it's ever been. I mean, you and I have been around hockey our whole lives. The USHL was not thought of, with all due respect, in this light as recently as, 10, 15 years? Like, the regard that it's held in today is probably the strongest regard it's ever been held in. I think it's a proof in the pudding type thing. Our college placement numbers, the resources that we're able to devote to development, it works. Like the athletes that come to this league get better. They get better on the ice. They get better off the ice. They're getting elite college placements. Okay, so now think back to that time in the Blackhawks draft room when I'm in the middle rounds. Okay.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're throwing darts. Let's be honest. You're throwing darts in the middle rounds, and late rounds especially. I'm looking to the USHL, and I'm looking to Europe because I have that longer developmental pathway. If I can draft Aaron, and I know he has 2 more years in the USHL, then he's going to college. He could have as many as 4 more years there. Why wouldn't I select the players with the longer developmental pathway? It behooves you to do so, right? So NHL teams will also validate that for us. They're looking for draft choices in the USHL because players get better, because they go to college. I think that's a big part of it. And you talk about those Midwestern cities, and yeah, but there is something to be said when you're only 45 minutes away on a bus and you have a rabid fan base and your entire league's like, there is something that you have a really great experience in these towns and you're embraced by the community and you're on short bus rides. The footprint works. But it's funny having Iowa as your centerpiece, right? Like, it's counterintuitive, but it works.
So I was thinking about this too, because I'm like, man, like I can remember getting a letter as a player. Like this is probably, gosh, like 97, 98 from PK O'Hanley
Oh,
in the
sure.
North Iowa Huskies to come to camp. I had no clue. Like I was like, is this a joke? Like there's no way there's hockey in Iowa.
Yeah.
Probably should have paid more attention to the letter in hindsight. But I was thinking about this myself. Like, what is it about it that has allowed the league to thrive? And one of the things, you touched on it, the rabid fan bases, and that's where I landed, because when I've talked to coaches in the league, and I mean, we'll get into the alumni list of coaches that you have,
Yeah.
they are put into a position where they are solely focused on player development. Where, if we're being honest, in a lot of markets in junior hockey, when coaches are cutting their teeth, they're driving the bus, selling the hot dogs, driving this, like they've got a whole host of things to focus on. And we're all allotted 24 hours in a day. And you don't, in this industry, the way that you give coaches focus is by having resources, which are a product of ticket sales. And you go to a USHL game. I mean, you've got, and some, man, it blows me away. Sometimes you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people in the building.
Yeah.
How important is that? Also just in attracting coaches like Jim Montgomery, John Cooper, like obviously really bright individuals that would have had options when electing how to pursue their career in coaching.
Yeah, so the USHL has proven to be a jumping off point, launch pad for coaches, which is awesome. And frankly, the John Coopers and Derek Lalondes of the world, those guys are the best sales pitch we can ever have, right?
For
Like,
sure.
you coach in this league, you coach well in this league, you're going to go somewhere, and coaches know that, and we're bowled over with interest by with people with resumes you can't imagine that understand the value of coaching in the USHL. I think it's all part of what you're talking about, and credit our owners. It's one thing to say we're going to develop young men and we're going to develop athletes. They're trying to do so many things. They want to win. They want a full building. but they are very sincere when they say we're going to develop hockey players here. And they invest in that, and they invest in strength coaches, and they put resources that don't always have the most direct ROI to help hockey players get better. So good owners, good coaches, good hockey people, that's what makes a good league. And like, we have that in spades. We're very fortunate.
One of the things that I would view as a challenge for the league, and I don't know why this hasn't had a greater effect on the amount of players you're producing, is the fact that it would appear that every team, like on a good year, only has to replace 3/4 of their roster. And you would think that with that would come more sort of dips season to season, program to program, in terms of the amount of draft picks or NCAA commitments. But it seemingly hasn't. How is a league, like, how do you address that to make sure that the pipeline is always full of talent?
So again, I think we're really fortunate. We're the only tier one hockey league in this country. And if you grow up, especially if you grow up in this country, and you're going to be a junior hockey player, you aspire to play in the USHL.
Yeah.
Like, we're very fortunate that we are the top of the mountain as far as that goes. Now, we have to be good stewards of that. We have to maintain that. We have to raise the bar, continue to progress. You never rest on your, but we are the only tier one junior hockey league in this country, and that's not nothing. So if I'm an elite junior hockey player, this is the destination. This is a very difficult league to make at 17 years old.
Yeah.
It's a very, let alone 16. But if you're in this league at 17 years old, this is a very difficult league to be in. These are players, and they're faster, bigger, faster, stronger every year. You have to earn it. I think agents know that, advisors know that, players know that. If you can establish yourself and get to the USHL, it tends to lead to very good things in your hockey life with your college commitment and beyond. So we embrace that. We're tier one hockey. We don't apologize. We want to be a very hard league to make. We want to continue to raise the bar. And we've been very fortunate. The numbers seem to bear that out. Like, we churn out a lot of players here.
I don't know if this stat is at your fingertips or if you can validate it, but I was reading that 245 former USHL players have played at least one game in the National Hockey League this year alone. The league's not, season's not over yet. So you do the math. I mean, there's approximately 800 NHL players at any one time. For nearly 1/3 of them to come from one junior league is remarkable. I look at in my opinion, it's one thing to go from junior hockey to college hockey, or anytime you make a jump. But I would say, the thing that really demonstrates if a league's preparing a player is how quickly a player can start contributing at that next level. I mean, you look at a kid like Macklin Celebrini that's, leading the charge at BU coming out of Chicago. Granted, very special player.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's been a long list of players that have gone from the USHL and immediately contributed at their college programs, and 2 years later are contributors in the National Hockey League. Again, you're less than a year on the job, but what's happening in the league, or what would you say is important at these sort of formative junior hockey years, or what needs to happen to equip players with the skill sets, the mental capabilities, whatever it is, so they can thrive at the next level?
Yeah, and it's that thing of, it's the iron sharpens iron mindset. Like, our league is so hard to play in, so hard to compete in, so hard to thrive in. Good. Like, good. We don't apologize for that. That's good. If you want to play in the USHL, you need to continue to get better. You need to work on the ice. You need to work off the ice. Now, it's incumbent upon us to help empower you as best we can. Are we giving you and providing those resources for you on the ice? Are we providing those resources for you off the ice? Are all member clubs doing it in a comparable way, right? Let's be honest, that hasn't always been the case in junior hockey. We see a wide variance between what some clubs are able to provide and what other clubs are able to provide. So can we get all clubs on similar footing with resources, with capability, with player development? those are kind of the continual battles that you're going to fight. But the USHL just seems to be this proven entity of you come here, you do well, you establish yourself as a player, you're going to play elite college hockey, and from there you can have a pro career, right? So major junior, a very viable pathway. My wife, a Canadian. It's nothing against the major junior pipeline. I happen to be partial to what we're doing here because I think pound for pound, you're going to develop every bit the player you are north of the border as you are here, and you have that college option. If you need we talked about longer runway going from the USHL to college hockey. And nowadays we're seeing college hockey athletes that are 22, 23 years old. Like you're ready for the jump. I don't think that's by accident.
For sure. And I've always, again, I'm chiming in here as Switzerland in the hockey community. But I look at like, the world that I live in most of the day is in, at the end of the day, the coach site's a tech company. And in that world, when somebody's thriving, you don't shit on it. You go find out what's going on and you try and out innovate them. Like that's the solution. And I don't know if that always happens in the hockey landscape. I think sometimes we try and, position ourselves in the living rooms of aspiring young players and how you speak of each other or other leagues. But I would just say that, at the end of the day, player development trumps everything. The leagues had 50 or more players drafted every year for 6 years consecutively. That's remarkable. And I mean, every league has its peaks and valleys, but that's remarkable. As a
Well, and again, I can tell you, and this is not lip service. Having sat, being very fortunate, but having sat in an NHL draft room for many years, that's a real conversation that real teams have.
I bet it is.
Especially when I'm in the middle and later rounds, that longer developmental pathway becomes incredibly appealing. So I can get elite players in the USHL, the best of the best, the first round type mentality. But again, when I'm in those middle and later rounds, I think this is as appealing an option as any.
No, absolutely. And I look at it. What happens at a league level from is there nobody gets drafted because of a PR campaign? But I just look back at it, like, for example, in the NCAA, whether it's the Hobie Baker Award, the Heisman, like when a player is up for consideration, I mean, there's just there's people trying to create a bit more noise. Is there an element of that, or maybe not noise, but so much just in terms of providing information, data, analytics that further
For
support
sure,
it?
and that's me putting the league hat on, which is a new hat. I grant you, but Dan Marr, a good friend in Central Scouting, when you have, and I don't have the midseason rankings in front of me, I think 4 of the top 5 NHL Central Scouting players have USHL ties. Like if we're not shouting that from the mountains, we're
For
doing
sure.
something wrong.
Yeah.
Like that's the story that we have to tell. And it's incumbent upon us as a league to tell that and to tell that as effectively as we can. So we talked about, if you haven't picked it up already, I am an empirical guy and I am a data-driven guy. Let's tell our draft story. Let's tout our college successes empirically. Like the numbers don't lie. And if I'm not talking about the top 4 or 5 Central Scout rated athletes with USHL ties, I'm like derelict in my duty, not doing my job as the USHL to message that. So we are competing for athletes. We are trying to win recruiting battles. That's one of those areas you can try to leverage.
If I was in your shoes, and I don't know why this hasn't come up, so it would appear, and I know there's other leagues. I mean, and we work with lots of junior leagues, but out in BC, for example, they took a step to open up their borders and enable players to have a choice on where they want to play. And to me, as somebody that's come from that league, makes total sense. And I get, as a parent now, I don't care if it's hockey, education, whatever. I think kids should be afforded the opportunity to choose the path that they feel is best for them, regardless of their location geographically. But I look at the USHL and I'm like, it would seem pretty simple that if you opened up the amount of imports that you are allowed to have, because you turn away a ton of great players every year. How is that? How do you balance that internally as a league in terms of how many non-U.S. players are able to play? Because I mean, just I look at Europe alone. I mean, the league is it's very much on the map of talented players in that part of the world.
We do talk about it, and you talked about striking a balance, and that's the operative word. It's you always want to maximize the athlete you have in your league. You want as many elite athletes as you can. We are a part of USA Hockey, and we're a proud stakeholder and a proud member. We're under the USA Hockey umbrella, and we do lead with that flag. And I think we do take. I'm a proud American, and like we take pride in developing American athletes in this league too, and being the top, as we talked about, being the only tier 1 junior hockey league in this country, being a member of USA Hockey, promoting hockey in this country, United States Hockey League.
Yeah.
I think that's very close to our DNA, and that's very near and dear to us as a league, to our owners, to our identity. You want to be careful not to stray too far from that, while also optimizing the type of athlete you have in your league. So do we have it right today? Maybe. Can we rejigger it, add a little here, subtract? Those are the kind of conversations we continuously have to try to find that perfect mix of athlete for your league.
When you got hired by the USHL, a press release comes out, and in that press release, it talks about the your time in Chicago, some of the benchmarks that you reached there, your time, which we didn't even get into with USA Football,
Sure.
in that role. Let's fast forward. I mean, I don't know aspirationally how long you would hope to be at the USHL, but what's the press release going to look like at your next job when you look back at your time here? What would you want it to say in terms of maybe some of the accomplishments or ways that you might participate in moving the league forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate the question. I get the question. The shortest, he left it better than he found it.
Yeah.
Like that's me. That's really me. Is you leave something better than you found it. USA Football, to be a part of authoring the high performance plan that got them into the Olympics. Like, yeah, you are proud
Can
of
you
that.
explain that though? Because I read that and I wasn't entirely clear on
yeah.
what's football doing in the Olympics.
So USA Football, which is to say flag football, not tackle, but flag football, is going to be in the 2028 Olympic Games. It's going to be an Olympic sport being played in LA. USA Football exists as the national governing body of football, no different than USA Hockey, but it pales in comparison in size, in scope, in budget, right? Yeah. So USA Football had aspirations, and the sport of flag football had aspirations to be in the Olympics. My primary task in being hired as the high performance director was authoring the high performance plan to help usher this sport into full-blown Olympic inclusion. And there's a process you have to go through. You have to get approved by the USOPC firstly. You're approved by the International Olympic Committee. They look at these prospective sports. You're competing against the lacrosses of the world and these other sports that are played in other parts of the world that probably I can't even think of, or they're escaping me right now, right? And you're proud of that. Like, sure, like you leave it better than you found it. And we were able to eventually get flag football is going to be played in the Olympics, and that's a neat thing. Similarly, in the USHL, this really does feel like a fork in the road moment for the league. It feels like the league is tackling a lot of major strategic issues right now. And if you can just be a small part of that and helping empower the league and working with so many great people that we have here, that'd be a really special thing. Could we leave the USHL better than we found it? And these important strategic decisions that we're facing right now, it feels like we're here at a pretty seminal moment. and hopefully we make some good calls, right? Like that's what you're hoping to do.
Totally. So when you're not standing guard by your phone on a Friday night, making sure all the buses arrive on time,
Yeah.
I know that you're also a hockey dad yourself. Now, um, there's a lot of expert hockey parents out there. You have a resume.
Let's ask them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have a resume that would suggest that you are, or maybe more so than most. Just looking at player development, not in terms of getting an NCAA scholarship, not in terms of getting drafted, but in terms of, young players, starting their hockey journey. What are some of the important areas of focus that you might shine a spotlight on to young
Okay.
coaches listening?
Great. So let's talk empirically again, right? You don't have to agree with Ian. Let's talk empirically. Don't rush your kid into sport specialization. The numbers don't bear it out, right? Let little Johnny, let little Jane play 5 different sports. Don't rush them into travel sport. Don't. They're focusing on hockey at age 9. Like, no, you play these other sports. You're developing complementary skills. You're developing as an athlete. You're developing as a person. You're learning skills on and off the field. Let's let our kids be kid. I don't want to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy for a second. Like let your kid play several sports. Let your kid be a kid. Unfortunately, hockey has a pretty tragic reputation of crazy travel sports.
Sure.
You have to have at least some level of affluence to play the sport. That's unfortunate, right? I wish this was a far more accessible sport.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, and I know USA Hockey continues to think about ways to make it a more accessible sport. But grow as a person, grow as a young person, develop off the field, develop on the field. Easier said than done. I hope I'm not one of these, wacky, wild parents. And my wife played university hockey in Canada, right? So, like, we are a hockey household. We're keeping each other honest. Let's not be that parent. Like, let's remind ourselves that it's a sport. Is your kid having fun? Like, are they leaving the ice having fun? Do they want to go to the rink? Now, that's not to say we don't ever push them, or discipline matters and we're not always happy going to practice, but have fun. Are you learning? Are you having fun? Like, I don't want to be that guy, but I guess I'm going to be that guy. That guy.
No, but listen, I think it needs to be said, and I think that I like to think that we're making some good progress in our sport. And I think the key thing you touched on there, and I mean, we look at this, just in our day-to-day work, is the data, and the data suggests that the way that a lot of people are getting pulled in terms of, gosh, you got to jump on an airplane to get quality competition, or you need, gosh, if your hockey bags and your hockey helmets don't match, like, well, God, you can't take yourself seriously as a hockey player. Like, a lot of this BS that we're seeing, I think we confuse that with development, and that's not development. And I think that the data would suggest that allowing kids to over ripen and understanding that the prime years are probably, after high school, in some cases, maybe a little bit at the tail end of high school, where I think a lot of the emphasis is like, gosh, if, going into high school, if we're not a lead player, gosh, like the door's closed. I think it's just educating people. And I think that just through the conversations that I have, I think a lot of families, coaches too, but a lot of parents, when they hear that, it's a sigh of relief, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to do what's best for our kids. And if the only inputs we're getting, or only information we're getting, is that, gosh, if you don't sign, Johnny or Jane up for this program and spend all this money when they're 11 and 12, you're going to hurt their chances. Any parent's going to lean into that, because we all want to do what's best for our kids. So I think it's just important to put, like, the right information in front of people, and they can choose to do with it what they, whatever they choose. But again, my impression is that a lot of people take it as a sigh of relief to be like, gosh, I can just sit back and enjoy this and let it play out a little bit longer.
100%. And you said you feel anecdotally, or you're hearing that hockey's getting better. I tend to agree. It does feel that way.
Yeah.
It feels like hockey is starting to get better at that. We have a long way to go as a sport. There's something about this sport, the keeping up with the Joneses, the travel, the spending, it's bad. It's bad in our sport. But to your point, it feels as though that message is starting to get across, however slowly, but it does feel as though it's starting to get across. I think hockey's got a long way to go, but I'm like you. I'm actually optimistic. I think that's starting to set in a little bit.
Ian, before we let you go, any books or resources that you have found valuable or that you would point people towards as a source of some good information?
Yeah, is it trite now to recommend Dweck's Mindset? Has everyone read Mindset by now? Is that boring? But Mindset, right?
Is that the
Read
title of the
Mindset.
book, or just,
Yeah, I believe it is Minds. It's Carol Dweck's work. It's the growth mindset, the importance of having a growth mindset as an athlete, sure.
yeah,
Okay, but how about just as a person?
yeah,
Um, I think that will empower you as an athlete, sure, but in life, like it really behooves you to have this growth mindset. And she lays out such an eloquent case for why that's so important. There's a growth mindset or there's a closed mindset. No, I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. No, I don't want to try something new. I might be bad at that for a really long time. No, like embrace that. That's when we grow. That's when we get better. You're going to be really bad for a long time. How else are you going to get better? Focus on the process. Don't focus on the outcome. Be process oriented. I think that book does as eloquent a job that I've seen. God, I hope I'm remembering the title. I think it's just called Mindset, but that's one that parents, athletes, get there. That's a good one.
we'll look it up. Justin and our producer will make sure it's in the show notes.
Yeah, make sure I haven't stepped in it, but I'm almost positive it's actually called, the book itself should be called Mindset, but it's that thing of you can have a closed mindset, and she does such a great job with John McEnroe as an athlete. We all know, we can all picture what John McEnroe was. Let's talk about why he could have been something else and perhaps something much better. What was holding him back? Let's look at growth mindset. It's a good one.
Ian, keep up the great work, man, and thanks so much for spending time with us. And hopefully, everything that was supposed to happen on time during this conversation, all the planes landed that needed to land.
Yeah, I might check my phone, and there's suspensions to be had and broken bus. Now, if I can return the compliment, Aaron, our coaches in this league speak so highly of you and your work. You are a vital resource to this league, not just this league, but the whole coaching community. But I can speak for this league. You are mission critical and vital to our coaches, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that you guys are held in the highest regard here.
Appreciate that, man. That means a lot. Thanks so much, and best of luck down the stretch here.
All right, guys. All the best. Thanks for having me.